Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be discussing one of my puzzles which I would say is of medium difficulty, so let's just get right into it.
So here's a puzzle I made a few months back. It's white to move, and I think it's about medium difficulty, so you should definitely try this one out if you would like. Let's take a look at the solution. The first thing to note is that white is down a bishop for a rook and a bunch of pawns, so white needs to win a lot of material. And also black is threatening rook h7, so it's natural for white to get his king off of the back rank. Let's first note that discoveries don't work. For example, rook f7 check, then just king g8 and white doesn't accomplish anything, or rook g6. Similarly, the king defends the rook. So we see that there are three ways for white to bring his king off of the 7th rank. And it turns out that capturing the pawn is the only winning one. And now we can see a few interesting points. First, neither rook wants to move. For example, this check would run into this counter check with the discovery picking up the rook. And similarly, if the other rook moves anywhere, then after some counter, the king can no longer defend the rook. So instead, black has to move one of their pawns. First, if black plays b4 here, then white plays king b5, stepping out of the line of the rook. Black tries d5, trying to go d4, but white plays king c5, bringing the king to this important square, which controls d4 and d6. So after d4, just bishop takes d4, there's no rook d6. And after b3, just bishop b2, white hides behind the pawn, and black is in zugzwang here. So instead, black plays d5 check. White does not take the second pawn, but instead plays king c5. Let's look at why king takes b5 does not work. Black would like to play rook b8 check to win the bishop, but of course, rook b7. So instead, black plays rook hf6 first, supporting the rook, so takes would not do anything for white. So white might try rook g6 in order to try to win a piece, but now this move works, and black would be completely fine here. Also, on the second move, king a5 doesn't work because, for example, black can play b4, trying to run with this pawn. And if white just passes with bishop d4, then b3 and rook hf6 is coming. This position turns out to be a draw as well. So after king c5, black has to move one of their pawns again. So d4. Note that b4 just wins pretty easily for white. King takes d5, b3, just king c5, and already black is in zugzwang. So instead d4 is played, and now bishop takes d4 and b4. It's a bit of a tricky position for white. It turns out the only way to win is bishop to b2. Other moves don't work. The king is optimally placed. Of course, if you take, then rook d6 is possible, hitting the bishop and trying to come back to the 8th rank. That would just be a draw. Bishop e5 would also be a mistake, allowing rook e6, hitting the bishop, and then the rook gets to retreat. King d5 would allow rook h to f6. And this turns out to be a draw because the bishop is cut off from the king, and rook g6 runs into rook d8 check. For example, king c5, then I think rook takes d4 is possible for black. And bishop a1 does not actually hide the bishop because of rook a6. So after bishop b2, black has nothing other than b3, and now white can just sit around. King d5, and black is in zugzwang. For example, if this rook comes to f6, then just rook g6, and the checks run out. For example, something like this. There are many ways for white to win, but white could just hide behind his pawn. And also, if the other rook comes to f6, then just rook f7 is similarly winning. So why is it that only king takes b6 wins? It turns out that it's all about the c5 square. So if white were to play king c6 instead on the first move, then d5 check draws. If king takes b5, then d4. Bishop takes d4 and rook d6. So instead king takes d5. Now rook hf6 works. The point is that rook g6 would even lose because after rook d8 check, white can't play king c5, so they have to play king e5 and lose their rook. Also, king a6 on the first move doesn't work because of d5 as well. If king takes b5, then again, d4 transposes. And if bishop d4, then just b4, king b5, b3, king b4, and then black just draws the bishop away. b2, bishop takes, and then brings the bishop back with d4. And after takes, again, rook d6 with an equal position.
So that was the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you can click here if you would like to watch my previous video, and please feel free to leave any feedback or comments or suggestions for future videos, and I'll see you in the next video.